We have looked at thousands of data points on previous election campaigns, from social listening, from activity around email and around direct mail, and we've brought all that advice together for you today, hopefully in sufficient time before plans are set in stone around election communications. And we'll be focusing specifically on how to promote registration and promoting how to vote. If you were at the Future Comms team inaugural session in Lambeth last week, you might have seen this graphic. But the Future Comms team is a new initiative, a new training initiative from LG Comms, designed to support comms teams with training. And Letterbox, eShot, Orlo and Can are all supporters of this program. Just to give you a quick introduction for those that don't know, Orlo is a tool for the public sector that enables social media listening, engagement and publishing. eShot are, in my humble opinion, the best email platform out there. If you're stuck on the platform beginning with G, thoroughly recommend shifting to them. They enable you to make savings and have better customer service. But email is your biggest channel, and it enables you to reach vast proportions of your residents and nurture them towards various outcomes. Letterbox are direct mail specialists. They are the only direct mail provider that we trust with our campaigns, and they have brilliant targeting capabilities, which I'll show you more about in a moment. And they help you ensure that we include those who might be digitally excluded. And Can, I'm John Paul from Can. We are public sector paid media specialists. We measure many different channels from paid media and then optimize towards reducing cost per outcome. A lot of that is about reducing waste, which we will get to in a little moment. Just to briefly cover the statutory duty, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but you have your elections officers have a statutory duty to promote participation, registration, and also to make sure it's clear on how to vote, to promote turnout. The Future Comms team principles that really sum up everything we do together are about including everybody, making sure that people aren't excluded from all public sector communications. Also, that everything we do is about saving money, reducing waste, reducing cost per outcome, and helping councils accelerate savings, which is pertinent at the moment. And also everything we do is measured. That we can't do the two above if we don't measure and demonstrate everything else. The mindset of the Future Comms team is about supporting all sorts of communications professionals to augment their publisher, sort of press officer, PR mindset with performance marketing to ensure that we really drive outcomes for the organisations we look after. In our analysis of multiple elections campaigns, and these included the referendum in 2016, the many elections that have happened since then, so it's got a rich data set, we could see that there was a lot of investment in channels and tactics that didn't yield much of a result, and quite small experimental investments in new channels that really did most of the outcome driving. So what we want to do is equip you today with the ability to advise your colleagues in elections teams on how to shift investment from things that are proven to be less than effective towards things that really work well. I think it's worth summarising the data that we looked into around who we're really talking about when we're driving registration and driving turnout. This person is young, they're a private renter normally, usually from a lower income background, and are overrepresented amongst the global majority. So this audience is under-registered and participates less than the average. So I think it's really worth understanding that these are the people we want to be reaching and need to focus our attention on. Now, when you look at where they are and the channels that they choose, it becomes very clear that social media and digital interaction is absolutely key. So top of the bill today, would like to bring in Helena Hornby from Orlo, and she's going to share with us some insight and tactics and ways you can use social media, and particularly the Orlo insight and engagement tools, to support your comms team and your organisation throughout elections. Helena, over to you.
If you're in comms and the election comms makes you feel a bit sort of edgy, that's not an alone thing. You know, lots of people feel that way. You know, pre-election times, it's when teams are expected to be fast and accurate and neutral all at the same time. But you know, the good news is that I think it's that good listening, simple factual comms do a lot of the heavy lifting in helping you out in these situations. Trust matters more than the volume of churning out stuff. People aren't looking to be persuaded by you. They want clarity, information, and to be heard so that they can make up their own mind when it comes to voting. And I think that's especially true of younger voters and first-time voters, who are one of those prime audiences that JP was just talking about. Although what we see a lot of the time, we see this across all the different channels. It's not big political debate. There's lots of small moments of confusion and the same question being asked repeatedly in different ways across different channels. And if you can spot those early, you can reduce the risk later. So I'm going to talk around a few points up front: listening to your audiences, being useful, and tackling misinformation. Before JP, as JP said, the rest of the team are going to go and talk about related topics like reaching those under-registered groups and managing those surges in comms requests that we all get, and using your owned media channels in a smarter way to help keep the costs down. So your audiences are talking openly on social media, on forums, in comment sections. You know that. Tracking those in conversations is what's going to help you understand what it is that matters to the people that you want to engage with. Listening to them and doing that listening is a neutral activity. It's safe and it is allowed during the pre-election period, crucially. Setting up your listening streams to follow local election related chat is really a useful thing for you to do. If you focus on key questions like, do I need ID? How do I register? What time are polling stations open till? You can even listen to the ever wonderful Dogs at Polling Stations and hop onto that content. But it's important to note that you should be listening at scale, not just sort of guessing what you think it is from vibes and from a few messages. Also pay attention to the tone, the emotions and the sentiment, like confusion, frustration, sarcasm, and you'll be able to pick up on disengagement through that as well. That'll give you critical insight before you even start to publish a single post. Don't assume either that silence equals lack of interest. If people aren't talking, it's either because they're talking in spaces that you're not listening to, or they're talking about something different and you're not tuned into the right things. The key point to take away from that is that listening helps you to understand what people need so that you're not just pushing messages at them. In preparation for today, I spoke to the fantastic organisation My Life, My Say, specifically around engaging young people about elections. And their CEO, Dan, is a great, really interesting fella. And he reminded me that young people do care about democracy. They just don't always engage through the formal channels or use traditional language. The low turnout in young people isn't about apathy often. It's about them feeling ignored or confused or spoken down to. So listening to real conversations that people are having, young people or whatever audiences, helps you to respond with clarity and respect rather than making assumptions about those audiences, which will help you connect with them. I also spoke to one of the young people, the young consultants from Participation People, Yaz, about this as well. And she gave me a really good example from BCP Council, who invited groups of young people to attend local election counts and speak directly with the people that were involved, right from senior officers to the candidates standing for the first time. And that made it so much more accessible and engaging for those young people, because they created their own content about what they saw, how it felt, and what surprised them, not to persuade anyone, but to just sort of demystify the process and make local democracy feel more visible and human to the target audience, because we all know that people listen to people like them. So getting those young people engaged in that way was a fantastic way that BCP addressed that. It wasn't about pushing registration, it was just about being open, and that giving that visibility helped spark interest and confidence among the young people who might have otherwise felt that politics wasn't for example that Yaz shared with me. So youth democracy organisations like My Life, My Say, they don't tend to rank councils or point to a single example of best practice. In fact, Dan quite wanted to do the opposite. He wanted to talk about behaviours that consistently work. What we hear time and time again is that young people do care about democracy, but there are often practical barriers. It might be unclear information, assumptions about what they know, or a tone that feels distant or patronising. Nobody likes to be patronised, but I've got teenage daughters, especially teenagers do not like to be patronised. Good engagement will always start with listening. So spot the confusion early, respond clearly, and make sure that the information is easy to find. People already spend time. And that's good advice for most audiences, not just young people. I can hear somebody saying something in the background. Somebody got a question?
I've just muted
Okay.
everyone, Helena.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully nobody had a question. You didn't cut them off there, Danielle. Let's go on to engagement. As you know, because of pre-election period, most election-related comms from the councils should absolutely be factual and service-led. If you are using social listening, you can still spot those recurring themes and identify the common areas for confusion. And those should give you your priorities for your official, clear, neutral, factual communications. So some of the examples that you will get around that that would come out from that listening: confusion about polling stations, misunderstanding about voter ID, questions from, say, students or young renters about where they're registered or what it means for them, parents asking how first-time voters in their household can take part. Those are the kinds of things that you might hear. So if you are using a listening solution like Orlo or another one, others are available, but you know, I'm from Orlo, you can prepare those key messages and your answers to those questions in advance. So your unified inbox will help you and the team swiftly reply either in the comments or DMs, or identify what material you would need to put to produce so that you show up clearly and consistently. With a listening tool, you can set up themes and tags. You can group related questions and comments across the platforms so you can see the patterns across all the channels and know how to respond. And that will also help you prioritize the actions, so you can really decide quickly what needs a web update or a pinned post or a briefing for frontline staff. It doesn't always has to be more social media. But the goal for you here is that everybody who is involved and responding is giving the same answers in a plain language so that it's consistent and people are receiving the consistent information. That's easier for you too, if to make sure that everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. And it makes sure that you do what's appropriate. So, you know, it doesn't mean always responding to every single comment. Often it means doing something to address that more generally. That could be update the web page if people are saying that we can't find the polling information. We'll update that so it's clearer on the website. You can pin a post. You could give a briefing for colleagues so that everybody is giving that same answer. We do see examples of councils approaching election comms in really solid, practical ways. For example, City of London Corporation ran an election engagement campaign focused on clarity and access rather than persuasion. They used insight to shape their communications, supported registration and candidate awareness, and saw a measurable uplift in engagement as a result of that. Closer to my home, Manchester City Council, they've taken a very operational approach in recent elections. This is from December, using really clear repeated messaging across email, print, digital channels to help residents understand things like postal vote renewals and key deadlines. They identified postal vote deadlines as a risk area and then ran the comms to address that risk. Neither of those examples are about sort of clever, witty slogans or jazzy marketing. They're about listening, spotting where people are getting stuck and the need, and making it easier to do the right thing that addresses those. Now, when it comes to experience, this is where I think a lot of councils feel quite nervous, understandably. Mis and disinformation at local level, it's quite can be quite low level, but it's fast moving. It often starts with things like wrong dates, incorrect polling locations, claims about who can and can't vote, rumours about candidates, for example. And if it's not spotted early, it spreads, and that's where social listening really helps. It gives you real-time monitoring so that you can spot spikes in conversations across the keywords that you identify. And those keyword alerts can surface those rumours quickly, especially if you've got, maybe a potentially contentious candidate in your area, for example. And that gives you the opportunity to assess, is it a confusion issue? Is it actually misinformation or disinformation if there's something malicious about it? Or is it something like a bad screenshot being reshared? And it gives you a chance to spot and jump on that. It's important to reassure you here that councils, you know this, but you shouldn't be arguing or amplifying that mis and disinformation. Particularly important to note that the safest thing to do when addressing that misinformation is to get the publishing the correct information on your own channels and being calm and factual in your replies. And a tool like Aula will help you decide when to respond and when you don't respond either. And I know that's quite a hot topic for people sometimes. The key point for me to land with you is that speed and nipping it in the bud and being accurate will help you to build trust with the right audiences. If you don't say anything or you delay, it creates space for rumours and things to grow. The aim isn't to jump into every conversation. It's about spotting that misinformation early, correcting it, and then avoid amplifying it by arguing publicly. And just to wrap up, the trust is the ultimate goal here, because trust is built when people all across the audiences, young people and you understand your audiences that you're trying to reach, but when they feel heard, not just informed. Listening is what helps you to understand where information is and isn't landing, and where confusion is growing, and what people actually need in that moment. And when your responses are clear and consistent and factual, people start to see the council as that reliable source of information, especially during these high pressure moments like elections. For me, I don't think, well, I do think good election comms, that it's not about persuasion. It's about that clarity and that consistency to build that trust. And listening absolutely feeds into directly what you publish, and it helps you to prioritize what goes into your emails and websites and posters or you're out of home. And that's what JP will talk about when he covers all that sort of out of home and stuff later on. So that's it for my section. And I managed to get a dog at a polling station's picture on.
Well done. Well done. Thank you so much, Helen. That was brilliant and insightful as ever. I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of requests you might be receiving in the coming weeks and months, and how from using data from thousands of campaigns, we've been able to come up with some recommendations. When I speak to people about CAN, I've been doing it for about 10 years, and sometimes it's quite hard to describe exactly what we do. But one way of looking at it is we produce machines or experiments that deliver some sort of outcome. And each campaign is a little mechanism to deliver some sort of outcome, and each one delivers lots of data. And so we've looked at data from multiple campaigns to advise about, when we're dealing with voter registration, for example, what channels should you be choosing and what should you be avoiding to avoid waste and increase outcomes. So when you run a campaign and you properly measure everything, it's quite easy to see which channels are driving reach, interaction, and then outcomes. And what we've found out very, very frequently is that radio, TV, paid for out of home, and even local press advertising doesn't work. Now, what we mean by doesn't work isn't that you'll get nothing from it, but it means that it has a very, very high cost per outcome. And the reason for those cost per outcome can be down to things like low ability to target, very low reach on that channel amongst the target audience. They say sort of low measurability, or it's very hard to measure. Well, hard to measure, if it worked, you'd know about it. So low measurability often means it just doesn't work. And also a lot of these channels come with really high waste built in, and it's unavoidable. So in terms of the sort of paid above the line channels, these things really don't work, and you should avoid putting budget into them. But also, digital is not a panacea. Just because something's online doesn't mean it delivers really good value and low cost per outcomes. Spotify, for example, really high cost per thousand impressions and poor response. TikTok doesn't have very good geo-targeting capabilities, so you can't just target your area, which, especially when neighboring areas aren't holding elections, that's a huge problem. X has very, very low reach. And we see that reach declining, much like on Meta. And it has very high cost per interaction. Nextdoor also has very low reach and very high cost per interaction. So it's very tricky to make sure you're reaching everybody when you start using these channels. And LinkedIn, again, is really high cost per click. So it's not that these channels have zero value, but they're just very, very low value, to the point that we would say, don't use them. For paid media, that is. What does work really, really well is using your free out of home. So rather than paying JCDecaux or people like that for it, councils are normally the biggest media owner in their area, and they can use their digital 6 sheets for free. So that often scratches the itch of seeing the campaign everywhere without draining your campaign budget. Also, website advertising, particularly remarketing to council tax pages, is a super tactic for getting under-registered, just moved groups to work with you. And can never be understated, but the power of email. Email e-newsletters are often the most read publication in a given area. They often outreach the local newspaper and even many social media channels in terms of actual views per week or per month. So using these channels and using this estate costs little or nothing and gets you vast reach with the audiences that you want to target. If you work with eShot, they have an array of pre-made templates which you can plug in using the sort of central to local messaging from the Electoral Commission. Also creating quick spin-up e-news or e-nurture functions where people can get email updates delivered to them. It's almost like people opting in to receiving election communications from you. But then your e-newsletters, the large distribution newsletters, can have advertising space in them, which will be seen and interacted with by many thousands of people. And thinking about audiences that do use your e-newsletter that might be highly influential, particularly with younger audiences, parents, teachers, people like that, it's a really, really powerful channel. And so using that to drive registration, but also make sure people are very, very well informed and able to access information on turnout works well too. An essential channel for ensuring people aren't excluded, particularly if you aren't paying for all of those low impact above the line channels, is direct mail. There is a strong rationale for targeting every household. But also we're able to use previous digital campaign data to identify digital dip zones. So areas where, based on the population, when you run digital campaigns, you get lower than expected delivery and interaction. People often talk about the digital divide. The digital divide is actually quite small. However, if you're that, meaning that you have no access to the internet whatsoever, but there are people on lower incomes and also what I call the grudgingly digital, who might have a smartphone and a laptop, but absolutely abhor using it. It's very important that they're included and they're reached by campaigns. And so using digital dip zone analysis helps us identify where these people are and make sure we can upweight communications to them, physical communications, to include them. So very, very important. Another issue with voter registration and turnout is that databases of addresses are often out of date and do not include new builds or new developments, which can mean you end up accidentally excluding significant proportions of your new residents. Also, students are frequently unaware that they can be registered to vote both at their parents' or their home address and where they're currently at university. Now, some universities have auto enroll programs, but with Letterbox you can identify where do, where don't, where you've got low registration, and then really target communications, physical communications at those areas. And also your council tax data will be a really strong source of people who have just moved. So you can have those remarketing to council tax pages from your site, and then also delivering physical communications to just the households that you need to, keeping that waste down, keeping that frequency up, making sure that you're fulfilling that statutory duty. Looking at paid digital channels, if we're zooming in on younger audiences, because TikTok doesn't let you geo-target well enough, it has to be Snapchat. Luckily, has very, very high reach amongst younger audiences, but also targeting young people and parents and the wider population using national and local news is highly effective in terms of reaching nearly 100% of any population. Meta is good, but there are many concerns around anything that it regards or its algorithm regards as being potentially political. It tends to either hold back or stop reach with it. It is also a channel which delivers very high numbers, but not much in terms of action out the other side. So I'd say use Meta sparingly, maybe for remarketing from those council tax pages and things like that. But also it's really useful to intercept search. So when people are searching around key themes that might be pertinent to them, questions around elections, you can appear amongst search results to bring people to the right information. So in terms of our recommended sort of future comms team elections channel mix, it's using those owned, those physical, those digital assets, those social channels, using really targeted direct mail, and using that mixture of Snapchat, news, and various other paid channels that are proven to work. And again, this is all based on that data from multiple campaigns, looking at what gives you the reach, the lowest cost per interaction, and the lowest cost per outcome over time. Now, if you switch from old ways to new ways, do you think maybe it's a factor of, a 20% increase in performance, a 30% increase in performance? Well, would you be surprised if I told you that it was a 14 times improvement in performance? Maybe, but it's not. Would you be surprised if I told you it would be 140 times more effective? Sounds pretty impressive, doesn't it? Well, actually, the real answer is the data from previous campaigns shows that if you adopt that mix and invest in it rather than traditional ways of doing things, you can end up improving reach, frequency, interaction, outcomes by a factor of 1,400 times. This is a staggering improvement, and this is why I think enabling you to advise your electoral teams on things to stop and things to embrace to ensure that you achieve your statutory duty, there is real value in it. If data doesn't motivate the decision makers that you're around, this is a useful analogy. If you think about a 45-minute commute to work, that sort of impact would be like accelerating a packed train tube ride home into a 2-second beaming from reception onto your sofa at home. So it's really worth giving people this advice. Hopefully I've given you enough analogies to get that across. So just to summarize the advice from today, start by listening and listen all the way through and react quickly with clear, non-partisan information. Use previous campaign data to reduce waste. There is a lot spent on things that have no measurable impact or outcome, and that means that budget and resources are going to things are pulled away from things that actually work well. Use your owned estate. It is a gold mine of free reach, free resource, and the perfect audiences that you want to bring in. Also, as you measure, make sure you've got evidence to prove that you've fulfilled your statutory duty to reach everybody and to encourage everybody to register and to turn out. And it is therefore absolutely essential that you measure everything so that you can prove that you've done it, so that you can optimize during communications, and you can then learn for the future. Just thinking about timelines and what you've got to sort of focus your minds on. We obviously have the April the 20th registration day and then the May the 7th polling day. This month, it'll be really useful probably to be looking at your registration data, your underrepresented groups, looking at if you have any analysis on previous election campaigns, what drove registration and what really did not. Know that now, because you can save yourself a lot of time and money and waste. And get your sort of social listening channel set up to listen to the things that matter, particularly to underregistered groups. And then in March, you'd really want to be modeling audiences, understanding where people are and building channel plans, and understanding what sort of budgets you need to get through to people. There should be a lot of clarity coming through on what the national and your tailored local messaging could be. I love the idea of getting young people engaged with the counts, helping them understand what happens at locals, what happens not at local elections, and then get sign off early. Because rushed communications are less effective. Getting everything signed off, planned, agreed early is really, really important, so that then even in March you can start running small channel tests around driving voter registration, just making sure those things are all in place and work well, so that in April, in the closing window towards registration, you can get your sort of full inclusion voter registration communications rollout. Whilst you're doing those, there will be opportunity to test, refine, optimize which messages are resonating, which aren't, and get better, so that you can then refine your turnout comms plan based on the data from registration. And then once registration deadline is over, refine that turnout comms plan, encourage messaging like make a plan to vote, find out where you're going to vote, have conversations about how you're going to vote, parents to children, young people with each other, all those kind of things. Just sort of socially norm it so that we can then support and demonstrate that turnout is improving. And after polling day, collate all the data from the campaigns, get the data on registration rates back, get the turnout data back, so that then in June you can do a full evaluation, looking at the messages, the channels that worked, and there'll be implications for that, for consultations, for engagement, for co-production, co-creation. All of this is absolute golden insight, which can be used for involving young people in more and more of your communications, but also to consolidate learning and make recommendations for future elections. So hopefully that's useful. Some advice on what not to do, some advice on what to do, and some timings for when things might need to happen. So Tom Evans, yes, we have a lot of data, thousands and thousands of campaigns. It would be really, if you wanted to, I could show you what works on previous election campaigns. The data is quite significant, but we can share dashboards, we can show you examples of measurement of all sorts of different channels, and yes, more than happy to share after the meeting. Kelly, you're on the call.
Hello, sorry.
Hello.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, with the turnout, I think that's always got to be caveated. You can encourage people to come out to vote and tell them how to, the mechanics of voting, but the politicians and the candidates, they're the ones that have got to give people something that's worth voting for. So, there's some of that is very much out of your hand, and that's going to vary drastically across the country, and from election to election. So, as long as the people who you're presenting those figures to keep that in mind, a lot of that is out of your gift.
Absolutely.
But it's turnout figures they vary so differently between different types of elections, and it's also bearing that in mind, I think.
Yes.
And this year's elections are going to be different ones across the board because of the what's been going on with some elections being postponed from last year, some being postponed again this year. So there are some different tensions and questions, and I think the listening will be very interesting across the board for people. You'll be picking up some interesting differences in areas too, particularly with the electoral differences between Wales and Scotland and England for this year. The no voter ID necessary in Wales or Scotland, but needed in England, and also the issue of postal votes may well be an issue. Just worth picking up the fact that if you'd apply reapplications for postal votes needed to be in by the 31st of January this year. If people didn't reapply, then they will no longer have a postal vote. Their postal vote will have been cancelled, but there'll be, I don't know how many hundreds of people, thousands of people who'll come to May and go, hang on a minute, where's my postal vote? So that's a comms issue for this year. So it'll be an interesting one to see how that's picked up on in different areas.
Totally agree. I think being able to prove retrospectively that you communicated those things to everybody is very important in all of this, particularly with the political tensions and what might happen down the line afterwards. So that's where wasting money on channels that you can't prove that is a real problem, and making sure that you can prove it, err on the side of slight over communication around registration and then how to vote. But yes, certainly making sure there's clear delineation between what you're providing and what the politicians are saying, I think is very key. Local elections have historic very low turnout, so there's a low bar. Another way of putting that is if you do have a good impact, it'll be really clear that you did. Just like to finish off by saying, good luck with it all, and hopefully this advice will reduce stress for you and give you more satisfaction around impact.